Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. Hello, Diane, and all the rest of the Friday Night Flock Talkers. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves, and I'm excited for tonight, but we need to go through those introductions and reminders. So we go through these every week, but for people who haven't been on before, they're new information. So we would really appreciate it if you could like the Leather Elves on Facebook. That way you get notifications when we go live. You can check the Facebook page for surprise sales, pop-up events. We had a pop-up event last weekend, and I want to thank everybody that participated in that. Um, Look at Nick. Nick sends me these reminders, and I don't even have to. He doesn't even have to be asked. We're still having. If you send us a picture of your birds using a Leather Elves toy in some way, shape, or form, a video or a picture, we will send you a discount code. So that's happening right now. And you can follow the Leather Elves on Instagram, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. So same information, but we like to put it out there every single week. And just so you guys know, so you'll feel sorry for me, we are supposed to get 6 to 12 inches of snow tomorrow. So if you did place an order, just be patient with us. I don't think we're going anywhere tomorrow. So so Michelle says they're new to her because it's the first time she got on time. Good job, Michelle. You get, definitely get some reinforcement for being here on time. So tonight I have a very interesting guest with me. We're stepping outside the parrot world, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you all Jay Lebow of the Javiary and the Bird Brains podcast. Hey, Jay, how are you?
Hey, Robin, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here, and we're not too far outside the parrot world because I brought one of my parrots, but I guess, known for being a passerine guy. So I'm happy to come over here in the parrot world and hang out a little bit too.
Well, we're happy to have you. Um, so you guys, just so you all know, I asked Jay for a bio, but Jay is way more interesting than I am. So he's going to tell you about himself instead of having me read something. And so we're going to let Jay do that.
All right. Well, let's see where to start. I'm born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where I first got into birds, fell in love with birds, and we can get into that, I'm sure. But um, I am now married. I live in Mobile, Alabama. I have three children under 4 years old and about 100 birds. And I'm, I guess now about almost 20 years into serious passerine keeping. I love it.
Nice.
It's yeah, a huge part of my life.
So should I ask which is more difficult, managing the birds or managing the kids?
Ooh, with the exception of bedtime, the birds are harder. For that, the witching hour, what is what we call it around here, it changes, but most of the time it's the birds.
There you go. Yeah, it's it's always interesting to talk to people with little ones and birds at the same time, because there is that similarity in some ways. So let's get started with, just for definition's sake, or can you explain to my listeners what a passerine is?
Right. So, in general, most passerines, you're talking about finches, right? Is kind of the colloquial term. Say that 5 times fast live. But you're talking about smaller birds. They're typically migratory. They're typically flocking birds. They usually have what's called interrupted flight. So, for instance, when you see a macaw fly, you see flap, flap, flap the whole time. Finches, you don't see that. You see flap, flap, in, flap, flap, in. And the majority of them, not all, but the majority are going to be seed eaters as well.
Okay. So I mean I didn't mention this to you before. I did a small workshop about adaptations, and Darwin did a lot of work with the adaptations with the finches and how they became who what they are and how they eat, what they do. And we'll talk a little bit later about diet, but I think, that's kind of an interesting study. And it was interesting just to think about the way like a parrot eats versus the way a passerine eats.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just, I mean, one of the big distinguishing factors for any bird, you can start to figure out how they eat by looking at their beak, right? And I mean, parrots in general, you get a lot of manipulation. It's almost like a hand, their beak, they'll climb with it, they use it for other things. Finches, it's just for eating. You get that sharp scissor beak that cracks seeds. The majority of, they're processing it, and they eat they tend to be more specialized eaters. The majority of your finches in the wild are only going to eat a couple of things. They don't have sort of as broad of a diet, especially in the wild, as your citizens do.
Okay. So all right, so we've got that down. Now, so we know what passerines are. How did you get started with passerines?
It's a very funny story. I found a drunk American robin in my yard in high school when I was 16. And
Wasn't me.
yeah, it wasn't you. So I I grew up, my first bird ever was a cockatiel named Chips, and I got him, I must have been 7. So I had a cockatiel for a long time. When I was 16, I found this drunk robin, and my mom, who may be watching, if you are, hi mom. Um, she
You've got a relative named Jeff who's listening, and he says, "Speak up a little bit louder so he can hear you."
Okay, that's my dad. So hi dad. But yeah, so she had a rule that if you had straight A's, you could have whatever you wanted. And I think a lot of kids would say more TV time or whatever else. That not who I was. I love pets, love animals. So I always, anytime I came across an animal, I wanted to keep it, I wanted to have it, etc. So um, I found this drunk robin, and I took it to the animal hospital where I worked at the time, and said, "Can we try to save this bird?" Luckily, they had a vet there who had gone to Auburn. It was all small animal, like dog and cat practice, and he gave it antibiotics. We tried to save it, but as probably most of the people here listening know, what happens is they get into like fermented berries that have fallen on the ground, eat a bunch. They've got a bunch of booze in them and permanent liver damage. The bird lived about 3 days. In the meantime, I built a flight cage for it in my bedroom. Um, and then for a few months after that, I didn't have any birds. But for Christmas, my mom gave me a book called How to Keep Finches. And there was a note on the inside cover, and I've still got the book somewhere. I need to find it. And it said, go for it. I love you. Merry Christmas. And so shortly after that, I went to my local PetSmart, which don't buy birds from PetSmart, but I didn't know any better. And I got a male zebra finch named Tarzan and a female society finch named Jane. And that was the start of my bird journey. And within probably 6 months, I think I had 100 maybe in my bedroom, which if my little sister sees this, I'm very sorry because we shared an air vent, and she definitely got woken up by birds every day for the rest of high school. So,
Oh, very cool. And so from there, how did the journey go? What does it look like?
so from there, went to college, went to the University of Georgia, go dogs, and kept the passerine thing going. Built, I lofted my bed in college and built a walk-in aviary underneath it. And was on scholarship. Luckily, was working in college and spending a lot of my spare cash on birds. Um, it was probably I was known as the bird guy in college, um, and just kept the hobby going there. Um, I did get into some hook bills. I had a budgie and I had an Indian ringneck named Carlos. And then from there, because of work after college, I actually took like a couple year hiatus. Then got married, settled down, moved into which there's the budget I'm about to talk about on screen right now, but moved into a tiny 600 square foot apartment with my new wife. And our first weekend together, she said, "What are we going to do tomorrow?" And I said, "I've actually got an appointment to pick up Bandit, the budgie." And she said, "What?" And so then, of course, everyone knows how that goes. You get one budgie, well, you need another budgie. And then I was at the pet store buying seed for Bandit a month later, and there was a pair of zebra finches, and I knew what they were, that had been there forever. And I said to my wife, "Well, I've got to rescue these zebra finches. They're just going to live here forever." So then back there, and then really got as heavy into it as I am now. And we moved down to Mobile. And I mean, I don't want to downplay. I mean, I've probably in high school alone probably bred 1,000 birds of 9 or 10 different species, but got to the big collection I have now starting in 2021 when we moved to this house, and I could build. I have the climate and I have the room to build the huge aviary that I have now. Yeah, there's my lovely wife on a Home Depot run. She's awesome. She's my hero, and she's the reason I get to get away with all this fun stuff.
And it sounds like she's wonderfully tolerant too, so that helps. When your partner supports you in what you do. I have a partner like that too. So my husband is amazing and succumbs to my whims, so it's a good thing. Um, so so you said, you have a big collection now. How many different species are you working with?
Everybody always asks me this, and I knew you were going to ask me this. I think and it changes. So that's the other kind of difference between passerines and parrot keeping, right? Is sometimes I'll trade or I'll sell pairs and I'll get new pairs. I think right now, total, I have 18 or 19. I've got hookbills are the easiest to list. So I have Borks, I have Budgies, I have Cockatiels, and then the Eclectus. Then I've got button quail, I've got diamond doves. Then as far as passerines, I've got I try to do it by continent. So I've got zebra finches, shaft tails, Gouldians, mass grass finches, and I think those are all the Australians. And then Africans, I've got red-billed firefinches, orange-cheeked waxbills, gold-breasted waxbills. And then Asian species, I've got spice finches and society finches. And I'm sure I'm oh, and I've got orange weavers from Africa as well. So, and I probably forgot somebody. And I've also worked
Weaver, I
with
love.
they're so cool. They're mean, but they're cool. And I've also worked with red throat parrot finches, blue face parrot finches, Forbes parrot finches. I've done red cheek cordon blues in the past. Um, and again, I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody else too. But all told, in my life, probably bred close to 2,000 birds and kept probably north of 25 species.
Mhm. Yeah, from, so from a citizen perspective, that feels like so much, but it's a very different world as far as, the flocking birds versus, the pairs or the singles. So do people kinda go, "Oh my gosh," when you tell them how many birds that you have bred or that you've worked with?
Yeah, I try not to use numbers.
Yeah.
Because if especially non-bird people, I mean, even people here, I'm sure if you have one macaw or something like that or a gray, I'm sure you tell people you have birds and you get the reaction. People get, oh, this guy's a bird person with some kind of negative connotation, which I've never understood because, like, we had my daughter's birthday party here last year, and if you came to my house, you, unless you were very snoopy, you couldn't think that I don't have birds because everything's outside around the back of my house. But when I watch people turn that corner and see the aviary, it's the same reaction little kids have at the zoo. They go, "Oh my gosh." And they come running over there to look in, and then well, why don't we go inside? And they're like, "What?" It's like, yeah, you can walk into the bird cage. So I try either not to tell people or I show them my social media with a bunch of followers, and that seems to give me a lot of street cred. So maybe he's not a weird, hoarder. Maybe there's something cool to see here, something going on.
I mean, and I do think it is different, and so Janice Lang asked, "Do you have any wax bills?"
Yeah, the gold breasted and the orange cheeks are wax bills. I believe the red billed firefinches, even though we don't call them a wax bill, are technically in the wax bill family. And I've kept, like I said, I've kept others in the past. I like wax bills a lot. They're really cool. They're definitely more challenging to breed than a lot of the Aussies or the Asian birds. And they're expensive. And I try to breed now. I try to kind of I used to have a lot more species. I used to have all those species at once, and I've kind of narrowed it down to focus on being less of a collector and more of a breeder because I don't want to lose species in U.S. aviculture that we can't import anymore. So I've really, as far as the African species, those three, but especially my red-billed firefinches, which I mean, I remember when not, but a few years ago, everybody had them. You could get them for $50 all day long. Now, if you have a
Mhm.
female red-billed firefinch, $250 for, a bird that could fit in this prime cup, right? And they're fragile. So I'm trying to focus on making the species that I really love more plentiful so that we don't lose those bloodlines in the United States because it's really, really expensive and hard to get them back if you even can.
Yeah, I mean, Adrian, Mock said, all that she was glad to see some people working with Borks and all the finches, which seem to have largely disappeared. And it's true, Janice said she had rosy rumped wax bills, and the vet didn't even know what they were. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we do face those kind of things, and it's important. I mean, I think that's something else too that people don't always think about is breeding from a conservation standpoint, you know, in the industry, that there are species that we don't see any longer in the pet industry, especially. And I think it's important. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and well, we stopped in the Obama administration in '07. They stopped African imports, so you can't get birds from Africa anymore. You can bring in African birds from Europe, but those are the same thing we have here. Those are captive bred birds just being flown across the pond. They're not, there are no wild red-billed firefinches in the Netherlands. So we've got to keep them going. Australia banned imports. I think or exports rather. I think their last exports were in the '80s was the last time they exported. So like Gouldian finches, no one on this live stream, unless you're in Australia, has ever seen a Gouldian finch even illegally caught from the wild. It's just not happening anymore. So, you know, I think it's really telling what you were talking about with the vet. I've consulted vets. I've had friends that are vets, and they're even exotic bird vets. Like my vet for Einstein, he doesn't know anything about finches. He doesn't know what to do with a finch. He might tell you probiotics, but that's about it. So I do all my vet care really myself. And then, I mean, on the USDA, like the new list that just came out, really the white list, and I won't get into that can of worms, but I was there at AFA, and it's clear to me, even the USDA, if you look at the list of pet bird species, right, they have all the citizens almost are all listed by species, and then they just say like, oh, and finches. So even the USDA doesn't know what's out there, who has what does what. They don't know anything about it. And
yeah.
unless you're me or somebody like me in this hobby, most people, even in the bird world, they might know a few of the common ones, but it's it's a small community, even in a small community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it used to be a lot bigger. And then there are pockets that you find when you're in the bird world and you're kind of moving around doing stuff, there are pockets of passerine breeders and enthusiasts, but they're not anything compared to what they used to be. And it's unfortunate. So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. Um, so geographically, you mentioned they're from all over. Um, so if you what are the geographic regions that you're dealing with, as far
Right.
as
Oh,
where
and
species?
I forgot some species you just reminded me of. So I've also kept jacquarines and some of the seed eaters, like white line seed eaters from South America in the past too. So right now, and that's how I think of it in my head, I have Australia, Asia, and Africa. Um,
Okay.
I probably will get back into South American, like New World finches, as they're called, at some point in the future. I just you know everyone here probably is used to this. You There's what you want to do and what you can do, and as
Right.
a hobbyist like me, if I had a zoo, or if I didn't have a full-time job and a bunch of kids, would I have 30 aviaries full of everything I could possibly get my hands on? And if I was Jeff Bezos, yeah. But you've got to kind of pick and choose where you want to be. And I think one of the big things that I try to get out a lot is the passerine community. People like me, I think the citizen community doesn't, it's not that they don't love us or treat us not, I've never had a citizen person be mean to me, to clarify, but I think y'all don't realize a lot of the time my community is the gateway drug to your community. Okay,
Sure.
so if you talk about pet birds, it goes budgies, and then right under that, it's zebra finches and society finches by the numbers. So
Mhm.
if we want to avoid bird regulation, loss of the hobby, if we want, manufacturer support, all those things, the best way to do that is to get zebra finches into every home in America,
Yeah.
right? It's the numbers, and it's a lot easier to bite off on a pair of zebra finches than it is to bite off on a hyacinth macaw.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that brings up a really good point. And it's not, I wouldn't ever call them starter birds because I hate that term. It's, people are like, oh, is that a good starter bird? No, there's no such thing. They're still living creatures that, you got to take care of. But I think it's there are levels of care that you look at, and it's they're different. They're definitely different. So when we're talking about keeping passerines versus keeping citizens, um, what are the big differences for you that you can, share with us?
Well, the first one is it's the biggest one. They Passerines don't need you in the behavioral emotional sense. So like this guy, he needs somebody, he needs a friend. He can't you can't just keep one big parrot and leave it alone for a week and it's fine. It'll go crazy or worse or whatever. My Aside from putting food and water in their cages, my passerines don't need me, and I think frankly some of them would prefer that I wasn't around. Um,
Oh,
so that's the biggest thing. I think the the care requirements on a broad sense are not that different, but the care hours are way different. You
mhm.
know, the citizens you're talking feeding multiple times a day, probably you're talking fresh food, all these things. Zebra finches, they if you get a gravity feeder and a gravity waterer, you could leave zebra finches alone for a week. You could be a single person that lives in an apartment, go on vacation, go on spring break if you're in college. I did it. Come back and your birds will be okay. Now I'm not saying abandon your birds. I had people come check on them, but they you can set passerines up and let them go, vice what a citizen needs.
I think that's one of the coolest things to me about passerines is you can let them be birds. We use that phrase all the time in the industry. Oh, I want my bird to be a bird. Okay, do you really? I'm not so sure. But with passerines, you really don't have a choice. You're not going to snuggle a passerine. You're not going to get a passerine that's going to sit on your shoulder like that eclectus, and hang out with you. And I think that's one of the coolest things, especially I find for younger people, for kids, that they can, participate in the care. They can, you know, be observe, and I think it's a great lesson in observation. I don't, you have kids. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's probably what hooked. I guess I didn't mention this before, but really put the thought in the back of my mind was my pediatric dentist had a Gouldian aviary. Like you see them a lot in old folks' homes or hospitals or doctors' offices, where they have like basically a giant aquarium that is an aviary, and they're glassed in and you can't really hear anything, but you can see. And they usually have like either Gouldians or societies or owl finches. And I mean, in high school, that first flight that I'm talking about, I could see it from my bed. And so on Saturday morning, I'd wake up, and instead of jumping out of bed and running downstairs, I'd just lay in the bed and watch a zebra finch build a nest for an hour. And so, I mean, if you're the kind of person that likes to sit on your couch and watch National Geographic, I've got that in my backyard. I've got a zoo exhibit in my backyard, and I've got chairs out there, and you can sit and watch a canary sing, watch a Gouldian finch try to impress a lady with a mating dance. I mean, it is a slice of the Australian, the Asian, the African jungle in my backyard or in your living room that isn't isn't going to scream at you, isn't going to bite you, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I haven't met a bird yet I didn't like. If I could figure out how to keep an ostrich in the backyard, I'd do it. But the ability of basically to kind of set it and forget it that you get from passerines is they are everybody should have them. They're the easiest. They're easier to keep than my dogs. I mean, they're easy to keep and they are really rewarding.
Mhm. So Michelle, has asked, so when will the webcam be live?
I've got cameras in there. I've thought about doing a live stream. I need to get Nick, your tech guy, to help me with it because so my main problem is I'm in my wife's office for this so we don't get interrupted by my kids. And the internet, my Wi-Fi router's in here and it's the farthest thing away is the aviary. So my internet isn't that great out there. Which is my main thing. I need to like get a booster or something. Like I said, I need to talk to Nick and figure out how to do it. But I'm not opposed to doing a webcam at some point, especially right now. I just put my Nest boxes in last week, so there's if you want to see activity now is, I mean, it's crazy out there.
I mean, I love watching them and they're mesmerizing. You just kind of sit and all of this goes away and you kind of can just sit and watch. And that's what I like about them. But so let's talk about diet. What are we what are you feeding? I mean, is it different from species to species? Talk to us about diet.
So another thing different with passerines is you don't have as much control over what they eat. I mean, you do in the sense of what I put in there is what they're going to eat. But as far as, so you put in a seed mix. So I feed Hari Finch Gourmet, right? There it is on the screen. There it is behind me. Um, and I couldn't even tell you how many different seeds in there. The ingredient list is long. There's 20 plus different seeds in there. And I feed it in gravity feeders and I let the birds choose. And this mix covers the different diet, well, 80% ish of the different dietary requirements for the different species. Because what a canary eats is a lot different than what a Gouldian eats, is a lot different than what a firefinch eats. That being said, even down to the individual bird, just like a citizen, they have favorites. So your Gouldians in the wild, they're eating like almost exclusively like sorghum.
Okay.
And so my Gouldians are going to go through and make a mess and pick out what they like. But one Gouldian might like these three, and a different Gouldian might eat those three and this other one. Or he might say, I don't like any of those three. I like these three other ones. So you have to be careful with that because you want to make sure that you don't get into things like malnutrition or obesity. And oh, by the way, you can't catch a passerine every day and weigh it.
Yeah.
Like I weigh Einstein every couple of days, just making sure we're keeping weight on, we're not going too high or too low. As of right now, what, and a finch eats something like, depending on the finch, in the winter, probably even way more than this, but about 30% of their body weight in seeds every day. The metabolism is way higher. So you've got to do all of this by observation. You've got to really watch your birds. And when like I said, I think right now, I say 100. Right now, I believe I have exactly 86 birds, unless I've had some hatch today, which I didn't get to check. So uh, you've got to keep an eye on 86 birds that don't sit still, that zoom around at 60 plus miles an hour. And it's a challenge. On top of that, I actually just recorded today an egg food video. So there's birds eating egg food and mealworms right there. So I feed live insects of a couple different varieties, primarily mealworms. And then I feed some dead insects, freeze dried. And also, I've got a bug zapper that catches like moths and things, and I'll feed those. And then I'll do a variety of kind of fresh food. So I like to feed kale, I like to feed green seed heads, pieces of carrot, um, and then everything that's in my egg food mix, which is Hari Tropomix, Pearl Morbide, Fonio Patty, which is a seed that has some disease fighting properties. And then I use Prime, Hari Prime, as a nutrient supplement on top of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a so how did you come to this? I mean, the mealworms and the vegetable, the kale and the carrots and then the seed that was in the last video or the video before that, it's like super clean seed. And do you find that so you say they pick and choose. Um, how do you I mean, do you know them all by sight? To know like, okay, this one's eating more of this one's eating more of that. How do you manage that?
So I definitely do know all my birds by sight, and it trips my wife out because I'll go in there and, like, if I haven't seen a bird in a few hours, I start to worry about it, and usually it means they're on the nest, they're in the nest, or they're just around, and they can hide, so to speak. I had some get out one time, which I documented that whole saga, but that was I was able to catch them back, which is pretty wild. Thank God for pair bonds, but having your wife call you when you're on your way home and say, my daughter actually saw two of my orange-cheeked waxbills sitting up on top of my bird shed. And it's not unusual for wild birds to come land near the aviary because either they're curious or there's spilled seed that they're going to eat. And my daughter told her, those are daddy's birds. And she was like, no way. And then she looked closer and saw bands on them. And I'd had a rat get in, chew a hole into the aviary, and then also through the bird shed, and the wax bills were small enough to fit out. And so I rushed home. I got home at 1 in the morning. I found one sleeping on the outside of the aviary, and I was able just to grab it while it was still asleep. And it took me another 3 days to catch the other one with a trap on a string and some millet, um, which was wild. But to answer your question, I can't monitor which birds eat what. There's just not a way to. Luckily, with this broad of a diet, I'm able to. Every bird is kind of on their own, getting what they need, and they self regulate. They know what they need. Um, but
Mhm.
between prime, egg food, and all these different options, everybody's able to get what they need. So it's sort of they do half and I do half.
So you mentioned that they eat about 30% in the winter, 30% of their body weight. So a
I
bag
think
like that
more in the
one,
winter.
more in the winter,
I think
okay.
I think
So a
50
bag like
50%. Yeah.
I mean, so how much do you feed like that bag? How long does that last you? You've got,
This is
close
a
to 100
20
birds.
pound bag. Yeah, 20-pound bag. In the winter, 5 days, maybe. In the summer, not breeding, or I mean, in the fall when we're not breeding and it's still hot out, maybe a week. During breeding season, when they're feeding chicks, 3, 4 days. So I mean,
Yeah.
and it's yeah, I mean, it's a buzz saw of food. His food is, even though it seems like the much bigger bird would eat a lot more, his food lasts a lot longer.
But he wants the gourmet seed. He's like, "This looks really good. I want this instead."
Yeah, that was a new shipment he was inspecting there. Einstein, he runs the bird shed, or at least he would tell you he
Mhm.
does.
So, what about are there things that you absolutely avoid with them, with passerines?
Yes. So all the normal not bird safe stuff, right, is still there. You've really got to watch. They'll get fat quick. Um, they are programmed, I think more so than the hookbills and the citizens. They are programmed to eat while the eating is good, because in the wild, a flock of birds will land in a field, eat the seed out of that field, and then it's gone and they've got to move on. So, especially your parrot finches, your Asian finches, anything really new world, they will just eat and eat and eat and eat. And so you've got to, I go to, when I'm not breeding and when I'm not molting, I go to what's called an austerity diet or a resting period diet. And I'll pull back. The egg food goes away, the live food goes away. I still feed the seed mix, but I really pull back on extra protein, extra fat. And, that's where you get into, again, different from citizens, not completely different, but different from citizens. You've really got to make sure you have room for birds they have an adequate environment to be able to move and fly and burn the calories that they're going to take in no matter what. And you can't, with citizens, you can just pull their food for a few hours, or you can feed them a set amount every day and monitor that. With these guys, I can't. So they've got to always have food available. So you just have to make sure that they've got everything else in their life set up correctly, that you don't get obesity.
Okay. So, which kind of leads into housing. When it's not a cage, it's not just a cage with a bird. So we're talking about multiple birds in cages. What does that look like?
So I always tell people, and I get asked this constantly. I get, I don't know, probably 40 DMs a month asking about this. And it breaks my heart. A lot of times, especially in your big chain pet stores, you see them for sale in tiny, smaller than a fish tank, tiny
Yeah.
cages with maybe two perches or sometimes just one. And that's not enough at all. I always tell people my base rule of thumb, no smaller than 1 square meter or 1 square yard per pair. So if you're basically you're saying, and length is better. So I'm saying, a 2 by 2, a 4 by 2 cage. Height doesn't really matter. It's that back and forth. So like I tell people, you're better off if you had a long bookshelf, just caging in a bookshelf and letting them fly back and forth as opposed to up or down. So like a lot of people get like a budgie cage or a conure cage and think, well, it's this big square box. That's a big cage. But if it's only 3 feet back and forth and you have 6 birds in there, that's too small because it's about the floor square footage, not the cubic footage, if that makes sense. Like, so right
Okay.
there,
So
what was just up is a holding cage that I use only for like quarantine or temporary holding as opposed to long life.
so they won't if even despite the number of birds, I guess my question is, they won't use that vertical space. They just use the horizontal space.
Right. So they have a big instinct to go high. So
Mhm.
the 97% of the time, my birds spend all their time on the highest perches in the aviary. So if my aviary is the main outside part's 15 feet long, about 6 feet wide, and 7 feet tall, and 97% of my birds' life is spent in the top foot of the aviary because that's where the highest perches are. So if that aviary was those same dimensions but a foot tall, it wouldn't matter. It's all about the horizontal space.
So I noticed there was a picture that had like little alcoves. So they'll go in and just like hang out and then fly some more and then go back in there and hang out. Is that how that works?
Privacy perches is what those are, and I've got several different versions. I've built some, I've bought some, I've built. Like I've gotten from Hobby Lobby, like they're for people to keep jewelry in or something, and I flip them vertically and drill a hole through the side and put perches in. But when you're keeping multiple species and even the same species, certain species that are a little more pushy or just more curious, it's not that they'll pick on each other, but especially when you're breeding, the males sometimes just won't give the female a break. So I have a lot of perches that will only fit one bird or only fit 2 birds, and it kind of gives them a place to go and get a break because they can't, you know, basically they can't always just defend themselves, and you could just endlessly, a male could just, let's mate, let's mate, let's mate. And meanwhile, she's like, well, I'd really like to eat. I'd really like to be able to drink water today. So it gives
Yeah.
them an opportunity to get out of the line of fire, basically.
Okay. So I'm noticing a lot of, like leaves and stuff like how do you so which I guess goes into enrichment, planting in a passerine aviary or what kind of wood for perching, things like that. What do you use?
So almost all my greenery is fake. Sorry if that breaks some of the watchers'
No.
hearts. I almost all of it is fake. Like everything you're seeing on screen right now, that's all fake. So,
Mhm.
which like after Christmas, I love it because it's like give me all the fake stuff that's on sale now. The only live plant I keep in the aviary is I have a big palm in the center of the aviary, and that's live. And as a result, I replace those every 6 months. Um, and so especially during breeding season when they're making a nest, certain species like your spice finches, um, your parrot finches, they are an unbelievable buzz saw of live plants. And they don't eat them like a citizen might try to do, but they use it for nesting material. They'll strip it into perfect nesting material strips, and you'll look at a plant that 2 days ago was 7 feet tall, and now it's 5.5 feet tall, and then in 2 more weeks it'll be 4 feet tall. So you've just
Oh,
it's you know you're they're not going to eat them, but they're going to put it in their mouth and right there. So I just put that in, and by the end of breeding season, that'll be as tall as my waist, and it'll you've got to be able to make sure everything's safe. As far as wood goes, you have more leeway than you would with the citizens because again, they're not going to eat it. They really only
mhm,
use it for like beak sharpening. But I still try to use all bird safe stuff. Luckily, here in the South, we have a lot of crepe myrtle bushes or plant or trees that tend to grow really long, fairly straight branches. And
mhm.
so anytime I see one of those around that's really overgrown, I will ask that person, "Hey, I'll trim your tree." And I've got some in my yard too. And then to my wife's dismay, we have a stack of perches, you know, 15 feet long and 6 feet high in our garage. And
Mhm.
every 6 months, I take all my perches out and rescape the whole aviary. And so that's a big enrichment change, right? All of a sudden, it's a whole new cage. And I don't have to worry as much about cleaning things long term. Things start to crack and rot and all that because obviously no preservatives. So, about the time everything's pretty worn out, I tear it all out, throw it away, and put in all new stuff.
Nice. And do you have issues? So I know I'm a big proponent. I get frustrated when people do, well, I have this one size perch that I put in. So you're using, natural branches. Do you have any issues with pododermatitis or bumblefoot? I mean, is that a thing with passerines?
100% a thing with passerines, maybe even quicker because their feet are so small. So a little sore on a citizen, a little cream perch change, you're fine. On a passerine, a sore the size of a pinhead on their foot that's the whole toe. So yeah, so I do have some dowel perches, but yeah, you've got to have different size perches. I'm a big advocate, even if you buy like a store bought cage, toss those
Yeah.
perches and get some sticks. And you risk bringing mites in, like feather mites, that way. So I always tell people if you can fit them in your oven, you can bake them in your oven, or you can leave them out in the sun or store them for a long time, like I do, before you use them. But yeah, you've got to have different size perches, and it um, yeah, I mean, even in my indoor flights in the shed, I do have dowel perches in some places, but I use different sizes because yeah, bumblefoot, absolutely, all that same stuff applies. All the health husbandry is very similar. It's just in micro, and as a result, everything you have so much less runway before you have a real problem. A finch gets sick, it's a big problem. It's life or death every time. You're most of the time you just find them passed away on the floor in the morning, and you never knew. So you've got to be much more proactive as opposed to reactive.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with the live branches, I think with since they're not chewing on the wood, it's not something they're gonna you like a citizen would. You could even if it's because we bake all of our wood that we use for our toys when we do the natural birch, and we put it all in the oven. But you could even if you put a bolt in between and screw them together, they're not gonna get down to that. It's not like they're gonna eat down to it like a citizen might. So if people are getting fresh branches, you can cut them to size to fit in your oven and then, screw them together or attach them. Um, which leads me to the next question. Perching for passerines, solid or with some give to it? Like, do you do swings or things like that? No.
No, they don't. Yeah, so that's a big misconception I clear up all the time. People say I'm going to get them a swing or I'm going to get them a toy, and
Yeah.
there are definitely toys like destructible toys, like where they can rip,
Mhm.
things that become nesting materials like coconut fiber or like the crinkle paper. Good to go all day long. In general, finches prefer solid. Now, that being said, if you think about the end of a tree branch in the wild, it's going to have some give. So I mount the majority of my perches. I'll screw in on one end, and then on the other end, I'll wedge it somewhere or I'll stick it somewhere, and then I'll link them all together. Which, if Nick shows like kind of the main front part of the aviary with all the branches kind of overlapping, I use floral wire to hook that
Mhm.
all together, which you could never get away with a citizen for a million reasons. Um, but so they do have some of those. I have some hanging perches too, but I actually have a weight on the bottom to keep them from swinging more, like you can see there and
Yeah.
there. So yeah, in general, secure perching, you can't cuddle with them. You can't do as much as you can do with a citizen to kind of help their anxiety. So the less variables to scare them and throw at them, the better.
Yeah. I mean, and it makes sense too. And I think, for years and years, we were taught that, finches need that little plastic swing with the metal, the metal pieces coming down. That's what were taught. And then we've come so far as, it doesn't have to be. And as far as enrichment, there's a lot of, I would think it's more about environmental than it is about, a play thing.
Right. Well, the biggest enrichment is each other, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a reason when they punish a prisoner, they put him in solitary confinement. When you have a citizen, this is his enrichment. Um, for zebra finches, right? Like we just showed, it's husband and wife enrichment. So they're a couple going through life together, figuring out the challenges of making and raising babies. So yeah, the there for enrichment for them, the biggest thing I do enrichment wise, besides letting them be birds, like you already said, is change the cage up. About the time they think they've got it all figured out, I don't move them to a different aviary, but I change the aviary literally completely, every single perch. Now it's a new
Mhm.
aviary.
And I think too that's the thing. I when I do lectures and stuff, I tell people, people are like, "Oh, I got to get a buddy for my hyacinth macaw," and it's like, well, okay, it must be nice to be able to just get a buddy for your hyacinth macaw, but you are the flock. You kind of build that flock piece in with a citizen. With a passerine, it's a whole different story. It's not about, oh, just have one. I mean, it's kind of punishing to have one, I would think, to have one finch.
Yeah, the only exception to that I would say is male canaries. And
Right.
I'm not advocating that. I think two's better than one, always. But I think male canaries, if you can get them to sing and whistle with you, and you can play them YouTube videos, canaries, I only keep one pair per flight. They tend to be a more solitary bird than even my canary pair. They don't really, you never see them sitting together. They never cuddle. They
Mhm.
never preen each other. You can see here, yeah, it's one of my males. He's gorgeous, but he's kind of a jerk. And so they're more of a loner than any of my other birds. So if you really were dead set on keeping one solo passerine, I'd say okay, male canary.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're this has been a great conversation. I want to couple more things as far as what people can expect. Um, obviously, in my opinion, Passerines much better as an aviary bird than, a cuddle pet because that's just not going to work. But what kind of expectation? So, people go, they get a bird, they've heard all these wonderful things about how you can train your birds and you can, be buddies with them and all this. It's a different set of expectations, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've had several hand tamed, like even, you know, hand reared finches, where I either inherited them. There's a couple that I had to rescue that ended up that way, and they will be really tame. They'll sit on your hand and eat a mealworm, and but they're still much, much more wild than a hand fed citizen. Their interactions are different. It's not. I mean, and they definitely recognize people. Like any finch definitely can distinguish between like me and a different person walking into the aviary. They go, "Oh, this is the guy that brings the food." Vice, okay, here comes some random stranger. But even the ones that I've had that were super tame, they they might come to you, but it's just never gonna be the same. And they'll do funny stuff. Like I had this spice finch that was hand tamed, and he would land on my mustache and just bite the heck out of my nostrils. And people don't realize finch beaks are really, really sharp. They're self sharpening, and
Mhm.
they can crack a seed once easily with the bite strength of a finch, which is not that much, but it hurts when it's on your nostril. So it's kind of I had a my friend Zeb Ernest, who's Blue Planet Pets on Instagram and TikTok. He's got a ton of followers. He calls finches and aviaries the aquariums of the bird world. So it's I think it's better though for a lot of people. If you're somebody who travels or you have young kids and you're not wanting a family member, which is what a citizen really is, this is a good way to still keep birds, get to see a lot of amazing things. I mean, get to see your birds build a nest, get to see your birds sing, all the cool things that passerines do. But it is a totally, for something that's, hypothetically the same thing, it's a totally different experience.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a great one too. So let's kind of close things out with a question. I have a question for you. Top species, if you were to tell people, we mentioned it a little bit before, people who want to get into passerines, where do you start?
Well, so like we kind of talked about before, the probably the hardest part about getting into passerines is availability. So like I live in South Alabama in Mobile. I'm close to Florida, but I'm not super close to like South Florida, which is your main passerine hotspots in the United States. South Florida, New York City, a little bit Arizona, and then California. So if you live in
Mhm.
Kansas, you're shipping. You're calling me and you're getting me to send you birds through the mail, which I do, fine, but it's much harder and much more expensive to get your hands on some of the fancier species. And I also, within the passerines, the finches, there are definitely a full rating of how hard is this bird to keep. Probably not that different from citizens, but it's much easier to keep a budgie than it is to keep a lorry, right? But this is probably cliche, but zebra finches, you can get them
Mhm.
almost everywhere. I mean, there's some baby zebra finches right there. They're really easy to work with, really easy to breed, which is a really amazing, fun thing to do. They have a ton of personality. There's some really pretty variations, and their care requirements. If you give them seed, clean water, and a source of calcium, and you have like two male zebra finches in a cage, they're humming along. They're fine. That's it. Good to go.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is that you've got to do your research. You've got to kind of know what you're doing. So you real quickly, you mentioned a source of calcium. What are we talking about there?
I do eggshells in my egg food, but Cuttlebone, they can work on Cuttlebone just like a Citizen. They just take smaller bites, right? It kind of looks like somebody took a rake and just scraped it all over the place. It just takes them a lot longer to wear it down. Or you could do Prime, and not do that. Or you could, like Hari and other companies, they do like mineral blocks, things like that. And you really, if you're feeding them quality seed, so like not, I always say like call it grocery store aisle seed. If you're gonna do grocery store aisle seed, then you're gonna need to supplement, yeah, like a mineral block like that. But even if you have just two males and you're not breeding, really just seed and water, and they'll be okay, with a nutrient supplement every now and again, or some fresh food every now and again. Um, it's not until you get into breeding, things like that, you don't really need a ton of nutrient horsepower because they're just not that big. Think about the amount of calcium it takes to run a macaw vice to run a zebra finch. It's a lot. You probably need enough calcium. The amount of calcium a macaw needs in a year is probably the same size as a zebra finch.
Yeah, true. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Jay. And so people can listen to your podcast. How can they do that?
So we're on Spotify and YouTube, the Bird Brains podcast. Me and my buddy Chris, who's bird nerd on all his socials. Great guy, great passerine keeper. His brother, I'm jealous. His brother keeps birds too. I'm trying to get one of my brothers to do it. So you can find that. I think there's a little code there, but and then I'm on pretty much every social media, including Reddit, unfortunately. But it's some variation of the Javiary. So it's either just the Javiary with no dash, all one word, or it's the underscore Javiary. But I'm very active on Instagram and YouTube. I try to check Facebook every day, and then I try to check Reddit every day. And always happy to talk, happy to help. Shoot me a DM. I mean, I love this stuff. I love talking about birds. This is my passion. So, people always ask me 10 questions and then say, "Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate your time." And it's like, this is fun for me. Like I want to talk, if I have to do this every weekend, like, oh, bummer. I like this. So if everybody wants to, everybody on the live chat, if you want to get into birds that, besides citizens, shoot me a DM. Let's figure it out. I love talking about it. I love talking about your plans, your cage. I love helping people through breeding. My friend, Bird Talk, who's also the Parakeet Detective Agency on Instagram. She lives in Brooklyn, and she's constantly helping people find lost budgies, or really citizens in New York City when their bird gets lost or they find one in the park. I just helped her get through her first clutch of zebrafinch babies. So they just fledged this week. Super fun for me. I love it. So I'm available on all those socials. And happy to talk. Even if people just want to talk about their birds, like, let's please do that.
All right. Well, thank you again. And everybody, all the comments are thank you and great information. And people are really, so Janice says she has you have her wanting to get a pair of societies again. So mission accomplished.
I'll have some ready in a few weeks. I've got crested and normal, so let me know.
All right. Well, thank you again. And I want to thank everybody who listened tonight. And if you've got just a reminder, if you've got anybody that you'd like to hear from in the avicultural world, shoot me a message and I will do what I can. I can beg and, see if I can make some connections. So send me that message. And next week, we will be talking with Dr. Jason Crean. We're going to talk about it. I'm pretending it's spring, even though we're getting 12 inches of snow. But we're going to talk about planting your aviary and safe plants and things like that. So everybody have a great week. I will see you all next Friday. Take care. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you so much.